She knelt in the dirt of Copper Springs, hands bound, rope cutting into her wrists, blood trickling down her face, all because she refused to let a dying man die alone. 5 days. That's all it took. 5 days of nursing a stranger back from the edge of death, and a whole town decided she deserved to burn for it. But here's what they didn't count on. The man she saved was still watching, and he hadn't looked away. This channel is your home for the untamed West. Stories of cowboys and outliers, of love forged in dust and hardship, of mothers who sacrifice everything, strangers who become family, and hearts brave enough to trust again. This story reminds us that the greatest act of courage isn't surviving the fire. It's choosing kindness when the world has given you every reason not to. If Clara's story moved something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today and subscribe. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. Thank you for being part of our community.
The day she found him, the sun was already merciless. She was out by the creek gathering sage when she saw his horse, twisted up and dead. Then she saw the man, face down and still. Clara dropped her basket and ran. "Mister," she said, her voice small. She touched his neck, a pulse, weak, but there. When she rolled him over, her breath caught. Blood, just so much blood. A deep, angry gash across his ribs was already drawing flies. His lips were cracked and his skin felt like fire. "Lord, have mercy," she whispered into the empty prairie. There was no one else, no help coming. It was all on her. She grabbed his shoulders and started pulling. He groaned but stayed lost to the world. She just kept dragging him toward the shade of a cottonwood. "You are not dying today," she gritted out. "Not while I'm here." Getting him to her cabin was a 3-hour fight. Dragging, resting, and dragging again under that relentless sun. Sweat burned her eyes and her whole body screamed to quit, but she pushed on. By the time they reached her door, he was mumbling fever talk, calling a name. "Margaret, I'm so sorry." Clara kicked her door open and hauled him inside, laying him on her own cot. The wound was bad, looked like a knife cut. Someone left this man to die. But Clara knew what to do. Her mama had been a healer and she'd learned. She boiled water and tore up her last good petticoat for bandages. "This is gonna hurt," she told the unconscious man. As the needle went in, he woke with a start, grabbing her wrist with a strength that shocked her. Where am I?" he rasped, his eyes wild. "Easy now. You're safe," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm helping you." "My horse. I'm sorry," she said softly. He tried to sit and nearly passed out from the pain. "Lie still," Clara ordered. "You move, and you'll tear these stitches right out." He looked at her then, truly saw her, and she watched him decide to trust her. He laid back down. "Who did this?" she asked, her needle working again. "Don't know," he whispered. "3 men with masks. They left you for dead." "Reckon so." After she tied the last stitch, she asked, "You got a name?" "Samuel," he managed. "Samuel Brennan." "Well, Samuel Brennan," she said, pressing a cool cloth to his head. "I'm Clara, and you're gonna live." That night, the fever took hold something fierce. Clara stayed right by his side, spooning water into his mouth and listening to him call for Margaret, and another name, Lily. That name seemed to break his heart every time he said it. "Should have been home," he'd mumble. Clara didn't pry. Everyone out here had ghosts they were running from. She had plenty of her own. Round midnight, he started shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Though the cabin was warm, he was freezing. Clara did the only thing she could think of. She climbed onto the cot and held him, sharing her own warmth. It wasn't proper, but the man's life was more important. "Stay with me," she whispered. I didn't drag you all this way just to let you go now." After a while, the shaking stopped. His breathing evened out. She stayed there all night, listening to the steady beat of a stranger's heart. For 3 days, she barely left him. She fed him broth and changed his bandages. She told him about her garden and the creek out back, just to fill the silence. She never spoke of Boston, or why she'd run so far from it. On the 3rd morning, his fever was gone. She woke in her chair to find him just watching her. "You're awake," she said. "So are you." His voice was rough. "How long?" 3 days. She helped him sit up, propping pillows behind him. "You've been here this whole time?" "Didn't have anywhere else to be." Samuel looked around the small cabin, his eyes landing on her bed. "That's your bed. Where have you been sleeping?" Clara just shrugged. "The chair does just fine." He looked at her like she was crazy. "You gave your bed to a stranger for 3 days. You were dying." Comfort didn't seem too important. Samuel was quiet for a long time. "I have nothing to pay you with. They took it all." "I didn't ask for pay." "Then why?" The word sounded almost angry. "You don't know me. I could be a killer. Why do this?" "Because you needed help," Clara said, turning away to tend the fire. "Because I couldn't just leave you there." She paused, her back still to him. "Because once, a long time ago, I needed help and nobody came." A heavy silence filled the little room. "Clara," Samuel's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you." Those 2 simple words made her throat feel tight. "You hungry?" she asked, changing the subject. "I can eat a whole rabbit." A small smile touched her lips. "Let's just start with the broth." By the 5th day, Samuel was standing on his own 2 feet, stubborn as a mule. "You're gonna tear those stitches," she warned him. "Been lying down too long," he shot back. "There's a difference between that and being nearly dead." "You got any family?" Clara asked, watching him ease back onto the cot. "Someone looking for you?" "No kin," he said, a shadow crossing his face. "My wife passed 5 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Wasn't your fault." Clara knew that tone of voice. It was a wall, and she didn't try to climb it. "I've got a small ranch," Samuel said after a bit. "Just outside of Copper Springs. 30 head of cattle. It's home." Clara's hands froze. "Copper Springs?" "That's right, you know it." "I've been there," she said, her voice tight. "They give you trouble there?" Samuel asked, sitting up a little straighter. "Folks cause trouble for anyone they don't understand," she said, tying a bundle of sage a little too hard. "I keep to myself and they keep to theirs." But Samuel could see she wasn't telling the whole truth. He could see it in the set of her shoulders. "What do they say about you, Clara?" "It doesn't matter." "Clara?" "I said it doesn't matter," she snapped, standing up so fast her herbs scattered. "You need to rest. It's a long day tomorrow." "What's happening tomorrow?" She hesitated at the door. "They called her a witch. The folks in Copper Springs whispered that Clara Mallister could sour a well and spoil fresh milk with just a look. But that wasn't the truth. The truth is, when she found a man left for dead, she dragged him home and saved his life. This is a story about how one small act of kindness can change a person's whole world. And it asks a simple question. When you see someone being kicked while they are down, do you join in, or do you offer a hand? That night, Clara sat by the creek behind her little cabin, feeling the cool water on her feet as the stars popped out in the big Texas sky. She'd made a mistake bringing that stranger Samuel home. He now knew where she lived. Soon he would go back to town and tell everyone about the strange woman out on the ridge. Clara pulled an old handkerchief from her pocket, tracing the faded yellow daisies her mama had stitched years ago. "Kindness comes back around, Mama," she whispered to the quiet night. "But so does trouble." The creek didn't have an answer for her. When the water got too cold, she walked back to the cabin and found Samuel standing on her porch. "You should not be up and about," she told him. "I could not sleep," he said, his voice raspy. He leaned against a post, favoring his injured side. I was thinking about why a good woman like you is hiding way out here, about why you jumped when I said the name Copper Springs. Clara took the porch step slowly. A woman like me? He met her gaze. The kind of woman who saves a stranger and asks for nothing in return. She stood close enough now to see the silver in his dark hair and a faint scar on his forehead. What happened to you, Clara? His question was soft, but it landed hard. She could have lied. She was good at lying. But the way he asked, like he truly wanted to know, made the truth spill out. I was accused of something terrible back east, she said, her voice barely a whisper. A long time ago. The man who really did it was rich and powerful. I was just the stepdaughter nobody wanted. So I ran before they could punish me for his crime. Were you guilty? Samuel asked. No, she said, a bitter laugh escaping her. But sometimes the truth does not matter. Sometimes innocent folks get punished just the same. He was quiet for a long moment. And what about here? What do they say about you in town? They say I am a witch, Clara said with a shrug. They say I steal children in the night. They say whatever makes them feel better about hating someone they do not understand. And do you believe them? He asked. Do you believe you deserve to be hated and alone? The question hit her right in the chest. No one had ever asked her that. No one had ever looked at her like her answer truly mattered. Some days, she admitted, her voice thick. Some days, I think maybe they are right. Maybe there is something wrong with me. Samuel reached out slow, giving her a chance to pull away. When she did not, he took her hand. There is not a single thing wrong with you, he said firmly. I have seen broken people, Clara. You are not one of them. You saved my life. You gave me your own bed. That is not broken. That is the most whole thing I have seen in years. Clara's eyes started to burn, but she would not cry. She had not cried in 6 long years. You should get back to bed, she managed. It is a long ride tomorrow. Samuel held her hand tighter. Come with me. What? To Copper Springs? To your ranch? I have land. I have work. I have a spare room that has been empty for 5 years. Come with me, Clara. It is a job offer. I cannot, she whispered. Why not? Because, her voice cracked. If I go with you, and they turn on me again, I will not survive it. Not after knowing what it feels like to be. She could not finish the sentence. Samuel stepped closer. To be what? Clara closed her eyes. Wanted, she breathed. The word was so fragile. Samuel lifted his other hand and gently cupped her cheek. Clara Mallister, he said softly, I will not let anyone hurt you. Not as long as I am breathing. You do not know these people. I do not care. If they turn on you, they will have to go through me first. She opened her eyes. He meant it. Lord help her, he really meant it. 1 week, she said. I will come for 1 week to see how it is. And if it is not right, I will bring you back myself. No questions asked. Clara took a shaky breath. All right, then. A real smile spread across Samuel's face, making him look younger, like a man who had not forgotten how to hope. We leave at first light, he said. Morning came hot and bright. An old mare from a neighbor was waiting for them. As Clara tied her small bag to the saddle, she asked, Are you sure about this? Samuel stood up, a little unsteady, but on his own 2 feet. I am sure, he said. I am not letting you face that town alone. Not now, not ever. Something tight in her chest finally let go. All right, she said quietly. Let us go home. The word felt foreign on her tongue. She had not had a home in years. But as Samuel helped her onto the horse behind him and she wrapped her arms around his waist, for the first time in a very long time. Clara let herself hope. The ride to Copper Springs was slow. Samuel's wound ached with every step the horse took, but he did not complain. "We should stop," Clara said, feeling the dampness of blood through his shirt. "We are almost there." "You are stubborn is what you are." He chuckled, then winced. "Takes one to know one." When they reached the top of the ridge, the town spread out below them. Clara's arms tightened around Samuel's waist. "Breathe," he said gently. "I am trying." "I meant what I said," he reminded her. "Nobody is going to hurt you." She wanted to believe him more than anything. But she knew this town. She knew the hateful whispers that followed her like a shadow. She knew the fear in their eyes. "Let us just get you to the doctor," she said. They rode down the main street right at midday. Every head turned. Mrs. Patterson stopped sweeping her porch to stare. Conversations at the general store went silent. The whispers started up like buzzing flies. "Is that the Brennan man? Thought he was dead. And look who he has with him. Lord have mercy, it is the witch woman." Clara kept her chin high and her eyes straight ahead. She would not let them see her tremble. Samuel guided the horse to the hitching post outside the doctor's office. He got down first, then turned and offered her his hand. She froze. The whole town was watching. "Take it," he said, his voice low and steady. "Let them see." Clara looked at his outstretched hand, then at all the prying eyes in every doorway and window. Let them see a good man helping the witch woman. Let them wonder. Let them talk. She placed her hand in his and stepped down to the ground. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. Samuel did not let go. Instead, he kept her hand firmly in his, turned to face the street, and stared down every single person who was watching. He stood there with her, defiant and proud, and for the first time Clara did not feel like she was standing alone. Every soul in Copper Springs turned to stone just watching them. Then one by one they looked away, pretending they saw nothing. Samuel grunted. "Come on! Doc needs to see to these stitches." As they stepped into the doctor's office, a wave of whispers broke out behind them. Dr. Whitmore was a kind-eyed man with steady hands who had served this town for 30 years. He looked up, his eyebrows near meeting his hairline. "Samuel Brennan, we all figured you for dead." "Not quite," Samuel managed. The doctor's gaze darted to Clara. "Mallister, ain't it?" "That's right," she said. "She saved my life," Samuel declared. "Found me bleeding out by the creek and patched me up herself." Dr. Whitmore looked at Clara with new eyes, maybe even with a touch of respect. "May I have a look?" Samuel opened his shirt. The wound was angry, but Clara's stitches were solid. "Clean work," the doctor admitted. "Where'd you learn such a thing?" "My mother was a healer," Clara said, her voice tight. The doctor cleaned the wound, put on fresh bandages, and handed Samuel a bottle. "For the pain. Don't take more than a spoonful." "What do I owe you?" Samuel asked. Dr. Whitmore glanced at Clara. "Nothing. Consider it a thank you for bringing him back." Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and hot. The street was a little emptier, but Clara could feel folks peeking from behind their curtains. "Well, that went better than I reckoned," Samuel said. "Don't celebrate just yet." Trouble found them soon enough. Ezra Harwell stepped out of the bank, looking like he'd been lying in wait. He was a big man, soft in the middle, but with eyes as hard as river stones. "Samuel," he said, his voice slick. "Heard you ran into some trouble on the road." "News travels fast in a small town," Samuel replied. Harwell's eyes slid over to Clara. "Miss Mallister, didn't expect to see you around." "I imagine you didn't," Clara said flatly. A flicker of annoyance crossed Harwell's face. "Heard you've been living way out on the ridge. Folks find that a bit peculiar." "Folks find a lot of things peculiar," she shot back. Samuel stepped right between them. "We've got business to attend to, Ezra." "Of course," Harwell said with a smile that never touched his eyes. Just being friendly. You know how people in this town gossip. Oh, I know exactly how this town talks. The two men locked eyes, a whole unspoken history passing between them. Finally, Harwell tipped his hat. Welcome back, Samuel. They walked past him, Clara feeling his stare burning into her back all the way to the general store. What was all that about, she asked once they were inside. It was nothing. It surely didn't look like nothing. Samuel grabbed a basket and started getting supplies. Flour, salt, coffee. His hands were moving stiff and angry. Harwell's been trying to buy my land for 3 years, he said at last. He keeps offering more, and I keep telling him no. Why does he want it so bad? Water rights, Samuel said. My creek is the lifeblood for half the ranches down in this valley. If he gets my land, he controls the water. Clara saw it all in a flash. And if he controls the water, he owns this whole town. You're a smart woman. Is that why those men jumped you? Samuel paused, his hand hovering over a sack of sugar. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know for sure, he said, but I aim to find out. So the woman at the counter, Mrs. Bell, was watching them with pure suspicion. Clara remembered her. She wouldn't even sell her a spool of thread last time. That'll be $3.20, Mrs. Bell said, looking straight through Clara. Samuel counted out the coins. And add 50 cents to that, for whatever Miss Mallister here needs. Mrs. Bell's lips cinched into a tight line. We don't serve her kind. Her kind? Samuel's voice went low and dangerous. You mean the kind of woman who saved my life? The kind of customer with money in her hand? I know if my wife, God rest her, was here, she'd be ashamed of you. Mrs. Bell's face turned beet red. Fine, Mr. Brennan, keep your change. Samuel gathered the supplies and took Clara by the arm. We're done here. Out in the heat, Clara's heart was pounding in her ears. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. She'll talk. They'll all talk. Let 'em, Samuel said, stopping to face her. Clara, I spent 5 years hiding on that ranch, drowning in my own sorrow. I am not hiding anymore, and I'm not going to let you hide either. She just stared at this man who barely knew her, who stood up to the whole town for her. Why? She whispered. Why do you even care? His face softened. Because when I was dying in that field, you were the only one who stopped. You looked at me and saw a man worth saving. That has to mean something. Tears burned her eyes. We should go, she managed. Trouble's just getting started, he said. And they rode out of town with whispers following them, like hungry coyotes. The ranch was a quiet place. A small house with a porch, a barn that needed a coat of paint, and a herd of cattle grazing peacefully. It ain't much, Samuel said, getting down from his horse. It's beautiful. He looked at her, surprised. You really think so? I think it's honest, she said, taking in the smell of grass and earth. I think it's the most real place I've ever seen. Samuel just watched her, a warm, wondering look on his face. Come on inside, he said softly. I'll show you to the spare room. The house was simple but clean. He saw her looking at 2 chairs by the kitchen table. My wife, Margaret, used to sit there, he said quietly. I haven't been able to use her chair since she passed. You don't have to explain. But I want to, he said. This place was meant to be our new beginning after the war. We were going to raise cattle, have children, and grow old. Clara waited as he struggled for the words. The fire took them. Margaret and our little girl, Lily. I was away on a cattle drive. By the time I got home, there was nothing left but ashes. His voice broke. I wasn't here. I should have been. Clara walked over and took his trembling hands in hers. It was not your fault. You don't know that? I know that a fire doesn't ask for permission. I know terrible things happen to good people for no reason. And I know that guilt will eat you alive if you let it. He looked down at their hands. How do you know all that? Because, she said, I've been carrying my own blame for 10 years, and I'm so tired, Samuel, so very tired of feeling ashamed for things that I did not do. Between them. Out in the distance, a lone cow called out. In the quiet of the house, something old and broken inside them both started to mend. Samuel finally broke the silence. The spare rooms are down the hall. They are not much, but they are yours for as long as you need. 1 week, Clara said softly. That was our agreement. It was. But as they stood there, hands still linked, they knew a week would never be enough. The first 2 days were a whirlwind of chores. Clara poured everything she had into the ranch, mending fences and feeding chickens. Samuel watched, grateful but worried. You do not have to work this hard, he told her. Clara kept scrubbing. I do not know how to be still, she admitted. I am always waiting for the other shoe to drop. He sat across from her. What are you afraid of? Everything, the word tumbled out. Staying? Leaving? I am terrified you will find out what they say about me and send me away. I am afraid to hope. Her voice cracked. I am afraid if I believe in this, it will all turn to dust. Samuel gently took the washcloth from her, his dry hands covering her damp ones. I am not going anywhere, he said, his voice steady. And neither are you, not unless you want to. You do not know me, she whispered. I know what matters. Then tell me the rest. His grip firmed up. Tell me what you are running from, and I will do the same. No one had ever asked. No one ever wanted to know. My stepfather, she began, he was stealing from my mother's shop and selling it. When he was caught, he pointed his finger straight at me. Samuel's jaw set like stone, but he stayed quiet. My own mother knew the truth, but she was too scared of him to say a word. She just let them arrest me, let them call me a thief. I ran the night before I was to be judged, climbed out a window and never looked back. I thought I could start over out here. She gave a sad little laugh. I figured if I went far enough, my past would not follow. But it always does. Small towns have long memories. Folks see a woman living alone, gathering herbs, and they get ideas. Pretty soon, I was the cause of every bit of bad luck in that town. I just gave up trying to tell them different. Samuel was silent for a long time. My wife, he finally said, his voice thick with old pain. She knew I came back from the war a broken man. She loved me all the same. When she passed, I figured it was God's way of punishing me for the things I had done. I thought I did not deserve a good life. That is not true, Clara whispered. Maybe not, but I believed it for 5 long years. I believed it right up until I woke up in your cabin, and you saved me. You saved more than just my life that day, Clara. You saved a part of me I thought was gone for good. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. I am not letting that go. On the 3rd day, company arrived. Clara saw the dust first, then 3 riders coming up the road at a full gallop. Samuel, she called out. He came out of the barn, his face hardening when he saw who it was. Ezra Harwell sat on his horse, flanked by 2 rough-looking men. Just paying a neighborly visit, Harwell said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Nothing neighborly about you, Ezra. Harwell's gaze slid over to Clara. I see you have taken in Miss Mallister. She moved to stand beside Samuel, saying nothing. What do you want, Ezra? The same thing I always want, Samuel. This land. And the answer is the same as always. No. Harwell sighed. I was hoping you might have reconsidered, seeing how a man all alone can get into trouble out here. Samuel stood perfectly still. What is that supposed to mean? It means bad things happen, Harwell said, spreading his hands wide. Men get hurt. It would be a real shame if something worse were to happen. Are you making a threat? I am making you an offer. A fair price, a chance to start fresh somewhere safe. Consider it a kindness. Clara felt Samuel tense beside her. I do not need your kindness, Samuel said, his voice dangerously low. I need you to get off my property. Harwell's smile held, but his eyes went cold as ice. You are making a mistake. The whole town is talking, you know, saying you have taken up with that witch woman, wondering if you have lost your mind. Samuel moved like a flash of lightning. He had Harwell by the collar, lifting him clear off his boots. "You will not speak of my wife," Samuel growled. "You will not speak of Clara. And if I find out you were behind what happened to me on that road, I will finish you. Do you understand me?" Harwell's men reached for their guns. "Samuel!" Clara's voice was sharp. "Let him go. He is not worth it." For a second, Samuel held him there. Then he shoved Harwell back. Harwell stumbled, fixing his collar with trembling hands, his face filled with pure hate. "You will live to regret this. Both of you. Get off my land." Harwell and his men rode off, leaving a cloud of dust behind them. "That was a foolish thing to do," Clara said once they were gone. "I do not care," he turned to her, his eyes blazing with a fire she had not seen before. "He does not get to threaten you. He does not get to say her name. This is my land. He could ruin us. Let him try." "You do not get it," she pleaded. "Men like him, they do not fight fair. They wait in the shadows." "Then we will be watching the shadows," Samuel said, taking her hands in his. "We, you and me. That is how it is now." Clara wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she would only bring him pain. But when she looked into his determined eyes, she knew there was no use in arguing. She had finally found what she had been looking for all her life. A man who would truly fight for her. She whispered, "Together." Samuel pulled her in close, and she felt the strong, steady beat of his heart. He repeated, "Together." That night, Clara just could not find sleep. She lay there in the spare room bed, listening to the ranch settle down. The crickets, the wind, and then footsteps. She shot up in bed, her heart hammering. A soft knock came at her door. "Clara?" Samuel's voice was low. "You still awake?" She opened the door to find him standing there, his eyes full of worry. "Couldn't sleep either," she guessed. He ran a hand through his hair. "I kept thinking about what Harwell said. About folks talking, saying you ain't safe here with me." "I have not been safe anywhere I have ever been," she told him. "That is what scares me," he said, looking right into her eyes. "I do not want this ranch to be another place that causes you pain, Clara." She stepped closer to him. "Sir." She was near enough to see the fear was for her, not of her. "I am tired of running," she said in a quiet voice. "And I'm tired of pretending I do not feel what I'm feeling." "What do you feel?" The question just hung in the air between them. Clara reached out and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his beard. She whispered, "I feel like I'm about to fall or fly." Samuel put his hand over hers. "Then I reckon we find out together." He kissed her then, slow and careful, like she was something precious. For the first time in 10 long years, Clara stopped running. The week flew by. They found a rhythm, with Samuel working the cattle and Clara planting a small herb garden. Every night at dinner, they talked for hours. On the last day, Clara found him on the porch as the sun went down. "The week is up," she said. He nodded. "Or," Samuel started, turning to her, "you could stay, for as long as you want." "Folks will talk," she warned. "Let him," he said. "Harwell will cause trouble. Let him try." Samuel took her hand in his. "I spent 5 years alone, Clara. 5 years thinking I did not deserve another chance. Then you showed up." He smiled a little. "All those reasons I had for being alone started to seem mighty foolish." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I am damaged goods, Samuel. So am I. I do not know how to be loved." He lifted her hand and kissed it gently. "Then let me teach you." The tears finally fell. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I will stay." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt like she had come home. But 3 miles away, Ezra Harwell was making his own plans. By the next day, her newfound happiness would be torn to pieces. When Clara woke up, Samuel's arm was still around her. She lay there just for a moment, letting herself believe this peace could last. Then the dog started barking hard. Samuel grabbed his rifle. "Stay put," he told her, but she followed him anyway. He opened the front door to an empty yard. "Scout!" he called out. The barking stopped. A moment later, the old hound came limping from behind the barn, whimpering with a long, bloody gash along his side. Clara knelt beside him. "Someone was here," Samuel said, his voice like cold steel. "This was not an accident. Somebody cut him." "Harwell," she whispered. "I know it was." Samuel's jaw was set like stone. "We need medicine," Clara said, wrapping the wound. "I will ride into town. Samuel, be careful. Lock the doors. Do not let anyone in till I am back." She watched him ride off, and then she went inside and started to pray. Samuel was halfway to Copper Springs when he noticed the two riders behind him. He recognized one as Harwell's man. He kept his horse at a steady walk. The town was far too quiet when he got there. He walked into the general store, and Mrs. Bell's face went white. "Mr. Brennan," she stammered, "I need some bandages and carbolic acid." Her eyes darted toward the window. "You should leave. You and that woman need to leave town today." "What is wrong, Mrs. Bell?" She wouldn't say. Just as Samuel turned to leave, the sheriff and two of Harwell's men blocked the doorway. "Samuel Brennan," the sheriff said, "you are under arrest for the assault of Ezra Harwell." "That is a lie," Samuel shouted, but they dragged him to a cell. Later, a deputy named Hollister came to his cell. "Harwell's men are riding out to your ranch," Hollister said. "They are not planning on bringing her back." It just ain't right when a good man like Samuel Brennan gets a knock on his door from the law. Deputy Frank Hollister stood there, all business, with his hand near his gun. He said the sheriff wanted a word. "This story is about how greed and fear can poison a town, but how one person's courage can bring the truth to light. Standing up for what is right matters, even when you are all alone." At the sheriff's office, Sheriff Morgan, a man worn down by his 15 years with the badge, laid it out plain. Ezra Harwell and a few others were making noise. They claimed the woman staying with Samuel, a healer named Clara, had put a curse on the Morrison well, killed their chickens, and made their children sick. Samuel just laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. She has been at my ranch for a week, and has not gone near that place." The sheriff leaned back, his chair groaning. "Maybe so, but 6 people are willing to swear they saw her gathering strange herbs nearby. 6 folks ready to call her a witch. You cannot possibly believe this nonsense." "What I believe does not matter," the sheriff said, his voice turning to gravel. "What matters is keeping the peace in this town. And right now, that woman is a problem." Samuel's hand hit the desk like a gunshot. "That woman saved my life. She pulled me 10 miles through the heat when anyone else would have left me for the buzzards. And this is her reward? You know this is Harwell's doing. He has been trying to run me off my land for years, and you are helping him." Morgan stood up slow. "Watch your mouth, Samuel. Where is she? Tell me, where is Clara right now?" The sheriff's silence was all the answer he needed. Samuel was out the door in a flash, his boots pounding on the boardwalk. He saw her in the middle of the town square. Clara was tied to a wagon, her hands bound. Her dress was torn, and a cut on her cheek was bleeding. And her hair, her beautiful hair she always kept so neat, had been chopped off ragged and short, like someone took shears to it in a fit of rage. A crowd was watching her like she was some kind of show. When her eyes met his, Samuel saw no fear, just a sad acceptance, as if she always knew it would come to this. He pushed through the gawking townsfolk. "Get away from her," he roared. Ezra Harwell stepped out, slick as a snake. "Now, Samuel, let us all be reasonable. This woman is a witch. She is a danger to us all. She has done nothing wrong. Clara's voice was a whisper. I did not do it. Then Constance Harwell, Ezra's wife, shoved her way forward, her face a mask of old pain. She killed my daughter. My little Emily was burning with fever 3 years ago. We begged this woman for help, and she turned us away. 2 days later, my baby was gone. Clara's eyes shut tight. I am so sorry, but the fever was too strong. There was nothing anyone could have done. You did not even try. I tried everything, Clara said, her voice breaking. I used every herb I knew, but some things just cannot be fixed. The crowd started murmuring, getting angrier. Witch! Someone yelled. Samuel stepped in front of Clara, making a wall with his own body. If you want to get to her, you will have to go through me first. Harwell tried to sound reasonable. Samuel, this woman has clouded your mind with her dark magic. Give her up. Let the town handle this. Samuel's fist flew before he even thought about it, catching Harwell square on the jaw. Harwell went down and his men swarmed Samuel in an instant. Arrest him, Harwell sputtered, wiping blood from his mouth. Y'all saw it. He assaulted me. Deputy Hollister stepped in, looking pained. Samuel, I have to. They twisted Samuel's arms behind his back as Clara screamed his name. Oh, we want both of you, Harwell sneered at her. Lock them up. They threw Samuel into a dark, dusty cell. Hours later, the door creaked open. It was a young boy named Jake. Mr. Brennan, he whispered, my name is Jake. I want to help you. Miss Clara, she saved my life once. I know she never hurt anyone. Samuel gripped the bars. Where is she? They have her in the old barn by Miller's Creek. I heard Mr. Harwell talking. He is not planning a trial. He said accidents happen, especially when a witch tries to escape. A cold dread washed over Samuel. Get Hollister. Tell him what Harwell is planning. Tell him an innocent woman is about to die. Please, just tell him. Minutes later, Deputy Hollister stood outside the cell, his face grim. The boy told me everything. You know this is wrong, Frank. You know she is innocent. Hollister was quiet for a long time, then he pulled out his keys. The well did not get poisoned. It went dry from the drought. I checked it myself this morning. This whole thing is a lie. He unlocked the door. Let us go get her. They rode hard to the barn and found Harwell and his men with a rope. Hollister drew his pistol. It is over, Ezra. The lies stop tonight. The truth came out, and the town saw Harwell for the greedy monster he was. They took him to the jail instead. Samuel brought Clara back to the ranch. As the sun set, she finally felt safe. It showed that even in the darkest of times, one good person standing for the truth can bring the light back. Then why did you help him? Samuel demanded. Because Harwell owns this whole valley, Hollister said with a bitter tone. But I'm not going to let him kill that woman. He unlocked the cell door. Your horse is out back. Go get her. Hollister pushed a pistol into Samuel's hand. Just bring her back alive. Samuel rode like he had the devil on his tail. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fire. He found the old barn standing dark against the twilight. He pushed open the crooked door and his heart stopped. There she was. Clara was hanging from a beam by her wrists. Her face was swollen and bruised, but she was breathing. Thank God she was still breathing. Clara, he whispered, running to her. He pulled out his knife and started cutting the ropes. I am here. I have got you. Her eyes slowly opened and found his. Samuel, she whispered. You came. Of course I came, he said, as the last rope gave way, and she fell into his arms. I will always come for you. They are coming back, she cried into his shirt. Harwell and his men. He lifted her up light as a feather and carried her outside. Hoofbeats echoed across the field, 6 riders. Too many to fight, he said, setting her on his horse and climbing up behind her. Hold on tight. They galloped into the darkness. Samuel knew this land like the back of his hand. He led them through a winding canyon, the sound of their pursuers right behind them. He made a sharp turn into a narrow pass he knew was a dead end. He and Clara scrambled up the rocks just as Harwell's men rode into the trap. From above, Samuel sent a rock slide down, blocking the way out. They left them there for Sheriff Hollister, who was not far behind. They rode home, and for the first time, Clara knew her running days were truly over. She had found her place to stand and fight right beside him. "Hang on tight," Samuel yelled. He pulled the horse sharp to the left, racing across the field toward a ridge. A gunshot exploded in the night. Clara ducked. "Are you hit?" Samuel yelled over the pounding hooves. "No, just keep riding." Another shot whizzed past his head. "We cannot outrun them," Clara shouted. "The horse is about done for." "We do not have to outrun them," he said. "We just have to make it to the ranch." They finally reached the top of the ridge. He could see his house, a dark shape under the moon. 3 more minutes, he thought. The riders were getting closer, close enough to hear their shouts. "Head them off!" 2 of Harwell's men split off, trying to block the path ahead. Samuel did not even slow down. He aimed the tired horse right for the space between them. "Hold on," he grunted and kicked the horse with everything he had left. The men brought up their guns. Samuel raised his pistol. He fired 3 quick shots. One man screamed and fell. The other man's horse bucked, throwing him hard to the ground. They shot through the gap and raced for home. The ranch was just up ahead. Samuel hauled his horse to a stop near the porch, helping Clara down before he swung himself out of the saddle. He told her to get inside. Clara nearly fell through the doorway as Samuel grabbed his rifle from its hiding spot. He followed her in, the door slamming shut behind them. "Bolt it," he said, his voice low. "The back one, too." Her hands trembled as she secured the locks in the dark house. Samuel took a spot by the front window, his rifle ready. The riders had reined in at the edge of his land. 6 of them left. They just sat on their horses in the moonlight, waiting. "Why don't they just come for us?" Clara whispered. "They're trying to decide if we're worth the trouble." Samuel saw one of the men dismount. It was Harwell. He was coming alone. "Samuel Brennan," Harwell's voice boomed across the yard. "Let's talk this out." "There's nothing civilized about you, Harwell. I am unarmed. I just want to talk." Clara clutched Samuel's arm. "Don't you go out there." "I was not planning on it," he muttered. He raised his voice. "Say your piece from where you stand." Harwell stopped a good 20 yards from the porch. "This does not have to end in more bloodshed, Samuel. You tell that to the woman you had tied up in that barn." "That was a misunderstanding. Things just got out of hand." Samuel's grip on the rifle tightened. "Get off my land, Harwell." "I am offering you a way out," Harwell said, spreading his hands wide. "You give me the woman and you can walk away. I will forget the whole thing. Forget the men you shot." He paused. "Clara will get a quick trial. Her sentence will be swift. No more pain." Behind him, Clara made a small, wounded noise. Samuel's voice turned to ice. "You really think I would trade her life for my own? I think you are a man who knows when he is beat. Then you do not know me at all." The false friendliness left Harwell's face. "You are making a fatal mistake, Brennan." "Maybe," Samuel replied. "But I will make it on my own 2 feet." A long silence passed between them before Harwell turned and walked back to his men. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now," Samuel said, "we wait." The wait was not long. The first torch shattered a window a little while later. Samuel stomped it out, but another one landed right after. They were trying to burn them out of the house. "Get some water," Clara yelled. They worked as a team, putting out the small fires, but it was a losing fight. The old ranch house was made of dry wood. Smoke began to fill the rooms, stinging their eyes. "We have to leave," she choked out. "That is what they are waiting for. The second we step outside, they will shoot us down." "Then what can we do?" Samuel's eyes darted around the fiery room. "The root cellar," he said suddenly. "My wife, Margaret, had me dig a tunnel. It goes out past the barn just for emergencies." His voice caught for a moment. "Come on." He took Clara's hand and pulled her to the kitchen. The floor was hot and the smoke was thick. He tossed a rug aside, revealing the cellar door, and yanked it open. "Go now. I am right behind you." Clara scrambled down into the darkness. Samuel followed, shutting the door just as the main room ceiling gave way with a roar. In the pitch-black tunnel, he found her hand. "Just keep going forward," he urged. They crawled through the dirt, every move an agony for Clara's bruised body. It felt like the tunnel would never end. "I cannot do it," she whispered, her arms shaking. "Yes, you can." Samuel's voice was steady right behind her. "You carried me for miles when I was half dead. You can crawl another 50 feet. She pushed on, and finally her hand hit wood. A door. It swung open to the cool night. They had come out behind the barn, hidden from Harwell's men who were watching the main house burn to the ground. "My home," Samuel said quietly. Clara squeezed his hand. "I am so sorry." "Do not be," he said, helping her up. "It was only a house." They crept through the shadows, making their way toward the men. The riders were distracted by the fire, certain their job was done. "What is the plan?" Clara whispered. "There's a shotgun in the barn, for coyotes." "The odds are not good." "No," Samuel agreed. "But they think we are already dead. That gives us an advantage." Inside the barn, Samuel found the loaded shotgun right where he left it. "You stay here," he told her. "No," Clara said, her voice full of a new fire. "I am finished with hiding. I am done letting other people fight for me." He looked at this woman, battered and tortured, but still standing tall. "All right," he said, "but you stay behind me." They stepped out from the barn. "Harwell!" The men whirled around, shock clear on their faces. "How?" one of them stammered. "It does not matter how," Samuel said, raising the shotgun. "What matters is what is about to happen." Harwell recovered first, his hand moving for his pistol. "I would not do that," Samuel warned. "This gun will cut you clean in half." Harwell froze. "You are bluffing." "Go on and find out." The air was thick with tension, the only sound the crackling fire. "You cannot win," Harwell insisted. "Even if you kill me, my men will—" "Your men are cowards," Samuel cut him off. "They follow your money, not you. Take away the man giving the orders, and they will scatter." He could see the doubt flicker in the rider's eyes. "It is over, Ezra," Samuel said, taking a step forward. "The sheriff knows everything. Deputy Hollister is the one who let me out of jail. By morning, this whole town will know you tried to murder an innocent woman. She is not innocent." "Is not," Harwell roared. "She is a sight more innocent than you will ever be," Clara said, stepping up beside Samuel. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Your wife holds me responsible for your daughter's death," she told Harwell. "I know grief can make a person do awful things. But I did not kill Emily. I did everything I could to save her." She looked him right in the eye. "I sat up with her all night, mixing every remedy I knew, praying. When she passed, I cried for her as if she were my own child." "You are lying," Harwell snarled, his face twisted in pain. "No," she said softly, "and somewhere inside you know it. You know Emily was too sick before I ever got there. But it is much easier to blame me than to accept that sometimes things just happen and no one can stop them. Shut your mouth. You have spent 3 years making my life a living nightmare. For what? To destroy another life?" "I said shut up!" Harwell pulled his pistol. Samuel fired the shotgun. The blast threw Harwell backward onto the ground. His gun went flying. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then one of the riders spurred his horse and fled. The others quickly followed, leaving their boss bleeding in the dirt. Samuel walked over to the fallen man who was clutching a ruined shoulder. "Do it!" Harwell gasped. "Finish me!" Samuel aimed the shotgun at his chest. "Samuel," Clara's voice was soft but firm behind him. "Do not. He deserves to die." "Maybe he does," she said. "But you do not deserve to be his killer. Let him live with what he has done. Let the whole town see him for the coward he is. That is a punishment far worse than death." Samuel's hands were shaking. He wanted to end it, to make sure Harwell could never harm anyone again. But he looked at Clara. She was not asking him to save Harwell. She was asking him to save himself. Slowly, he lowered the gun. "You are finished, Harwell," he said. "Your reign in this town is over." He turned his back on the man and took Clara's hand. Together they walked away from the fire and the hatred. They reached old Nettie's house, just as the sun was coming up. The woman took one look at their smoky, battered figures and brought them inside without asking a single question. Clara slept for 16 hours straight. When she opened her eyes, Samuel was there, just watching her. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey, yourself," he said, brushing her hair back. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was dragged behind a horse." "Worse," she mumbled, trying to smile. "What happened?" "Hollister arrested Harwell. They found letters in his office proving he hired those men to run me off the road. He'd been doing it for years to anyone who wouldn't sell their land." Samuel's voice got softer. "Nettie came by this morning. She wanted to see you." Clara went still. "What for?" "To apologize. She said she always knew in her heart you tried to save Emily, but her grief made her blind. She's sorry." Tears slipped from under Clara's closed eyelids. "I wanted to save her so badly." "I know," he said, taking her hand. "But sometimes trying is all we can do. It doesn't mean you ever stop." They lay there in the quiet morning light, listening to the birds sing outside. It was the sound of a new beginning. "What will we do now?" she asked him. Samuel lifted her hand and kissed it. "We will do whatever we want. The land is still mine. The cattle herd survived. We can build it all back." He saw the doubt in her eyes. "You did not think I was letting you go, did you?" Clara turned away. "Your house is gone because I was here. Houses can be rebuilt, but people will still talk. Let them." He moved closer, cupping her face in his hands. "Clara, I spent 5 years feeling like a dead man walking. I was sure I would never feel a single thing again. Then you came and dragged me back to the living. I am not walking away from that over some town gossip. I do not know how to do this," she admitted in a small voice. "I do not know how to be happy." "Neither do I," he said gently, "but I figure we can learn how to do it together." She looked deep into his eyes, searching for any sign he might change his mind. She found none. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Let us rebuild." A real smile spread across Samuel's face, and he kissed her softly. "That is my girl," he murmured. Clara actually laughed, and for the first time in years the sound was easy. "I am not anybody's girl," she told him. "No," Samuel agreed. "You are not. You are Clara Mallister. You are the bravest, most stubborn, and most beautiful woman I have ever known. Flatterer. Truth-teller." He kissed her again, and Clara felt something old and scared inside her chest finally begin to heal. The sun climbed higher over the town of Copper Springs. In a quiet room, 2 broken people held on to each other, daring to hope for a second chance. 3 weeks after the fire, Samuel drove the last nail into the new porch railing. Clara watched from the doorway as her coffee grew cold. The house was not finished. The roof was only half shingled and oilcloth covered the windows, but it was standing. That was enough. "You missed a spot," she called out. Samuel looked up, his face dripping with sweat. "Where? I am joking. That is not funny." His face said it was. He had been smiling a lot these past few weeks. "Come help me with these boards," he said. "I am supervising. You are being lazy. I am recovering from trauma." "You recovered from that 2 weeks ago." Clara set down her coffee and walked into the yard. Her body still had its aches and bruises, but she moved easier now. She breathed easier. "Fine," she said. "But if I get a splinter, you are pulling it out. Deal." They worked side by side, hammering nails in a steady rhythm under the hot sun. "Samuel, thank you." He stopped his work. "For what?" "For this. For not giving up on me. For making me believe I could have something good." Samuel set down his hammer and faced her. Clara Mallister, are you listening to me? I am standing right here. Then hear this. He took her hands. I did not give you anything. Everything you have, you earned. Your strength, your courage, your right to be here, that is all you. But if you had not found me, I would have found another way. You always do. He squeezed her hands. I just got lucky enough to be there when you needed someone. Clara's eyes burned. You are going to make me cry. Good, you do not cry enough. You do not. Not where anyone can see. Samuel lifted her chin. You are allowed to be soft, Clara. You are allowed to feel. That don't make you weak. The tears finally fell, running down her cheeks as she lost the fight to hold them back. Samuel just pulled her close, holding her while she wept. It wasn't for sadness this time, but for a feeling she couldn't rightly name. Maybe relief or the start of hope. I love you, she whispered into his shirt. Samuel went rigid. What was that you said? Clara pulled away, a flash of fear in her eyes. The words had just tumbled out. Nothing, I didn't say it. Clara, please. His voice was rough. Say it again. She looked into his eyes and saw the hope and fear all tangled up in them. I love you, she said, clear as a bell. I love you, Samuel Brennan. He kissed her then, a kiss full of hunger, and all the words he couldn't speak. She kissed him right back, her heart hammering away. When they parted, he finally said, I love you too, in case that wasn't clear. She gave a little laugh, wiping at her eyes. Maybe say it one more time. I love you, Clara Mallister, and I'll keep on saying it till you believe me. The sound of horse hooves coming up the road made them both turn. A rider was approaching and moving fast. Samuel reached for his rifle, but Clara put a hand on his arm. Hold on, look. It was Jake, the boy who'd helped them get away. He reined his horse in hard right at the porch. Mr. Brennan, Miss Clara, y'all have to come now. What is it, son? Samuel asked. It's Mrs. Harwell. She's down at the church telling everybody what really happened. Clara's heart sank. What's she saying? Good things, Jake said, his eyes shining. She's telling the whole town the truth, about how her husband tried to kill you and how he's been running folks off their land for years. Samuel and Clara shared a long look. Now, why would she go and do that? Clara wondered aloud. I don't know, ma'am, but the entire town is there listening. Y'all ought to come hear it for yourselves. They rode into Copper Springs with Clara's arms wrapped tight around Samuel's waist. The streets were empty because everyone was packed into the church. They could hear Constance Harwell's voice carrying out the doors. I was blind, she was saying, blinded by my own grief and anger. I let my husband turn my pain into a weapon, and I am deeply ashamed. Samuel pushed the doors open, and every soul in that church turned to stare. Constance stood at the front, her face pale but her voice steady. When she saw Clara, her expression faltered. Miss Mallister, she said, her voice trembling, please, come forward. There is something I must say to you. Clara froze. Samuel's hand found hers. You don't have to, he whispered. Yes, I do. She walked down that aisle, past all the faces that had whispered lies about her for so long. She stopped right in front of Constance Harwell. You had something to say, Clara prompted. Then say it. I blamed you for my daughter's death, Constance began, tears welling in her eyes. I needed someone to blame, and you were a stranger. Easy to hate. But I was wrong. Her voice broke. Emily was already gone by the time you arrived. The doctor told me there was nothing anyone could have done, but I refused to listen. I just wanted someone to pay. Clara stood there waiting. You didn't kill my daughter, Constance said, her voice clear. You tried to save her, and I paid you back by destroying your life. Then she dropped to her knees. I am so sorry. I know words are not enough, but I am sorry. The church was dead silent. Clara looked down at the woman who had called her a witch. who had let a whole town turn on her. All Clara felt was a deep weariness. "Get up," she said softly. Constance looked up, confused. "I said, get up. There's no need to kneel." As Constance slowly stood, Clara took a breath. "I accept your apology." A quiet murmur went through the crowd. "But," Clara added, her voice firm, "accepting is not the same as forgetting. What you and your husband in this town did to me, that doesn't just vanish. I need time. Time to heal, and time to learn if I can ever trust this place again." Old Nettie's voice rang out from the back. "I can give you that. I've known this girl for 3 years. She's helped me with my arthritis and birthed more babies than I can count, and I never said a word to defend her. I was a coward, but I'm done with that now." Then another spoke up. "My children weren't sick from her. They just ate too many green apples. I knew it, but I let Harwell convince me otherwise." One by one, others confessed their parts. Clara stood there overwhelmed as Samuel came to her side. "You all right?" he asked. "I don't know," she whispered. "Is any of this real?" "It's real." They walked out of the church into the setting sun. The whole town felt lighter. Jake ran up to her, holding a folded piece of paper. "My mama wanted you to have this. She said she was sorry she couldn't say it herself." Clara unfolded it. It was a recipe for cornbread with a shaky note at the bottom. "Thank you for saving my boy." Tears burned in her eyes. "Tell your mama thank you." Jake grinned. "I will. And Miss Clara, I'm sure glad you're staying." He took off before she could answer. Samuel helped her onto the horse. "Ready to go home?" Home. The word felt strange on her tongue. "Yes," she said at last. "I'm ready." They rode back to the ranch as the sky turned to gold and orange. Scout, their dog, came limping out to greet them, his tail wagging. His wound was mostly healed, just a thin scar left behind. Clara knelt to scratch his ears. "You miss us, boy?" The dog licked her face. "I'll take that as a yes." Samuel lifted her down from the horse and pulled her into his arms. "Quite a day," he said. "Quite a month," she replied. "Any regrets? About finding me, saving me, all of it?" She pretended to ponder it. "Well, getting beat up wasn't my favorite part, and the house burning down was a shame." He silenced her with a kiss. "Smart Alec," he murmured. "You love it." "I do." His expression turned serious. "Clara, I need to ask you something." Her heart gave a little jump. "What is it?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, worn gold band. "This was Margaret's. It's the only thing I have left of her." Clara's breath hitched. "I've carried this for 5 years, unable to let go." "But you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you showed me that moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It just means being brave enough to love again. I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm asking you to build something new with me." He held out the ring. "Clara Mallister, will you marry me?" The word was out of her mouth before she could even think. "Yes. Yes, you fool, I'll marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it was made for her. Then he lifted her clean off her feet, spinning her around while they both laughed. "I love you." He said it plainly, then kissed her deeply while Scout the dog barked at their feet. The late sun painted the whole world gold. The wedding took place 3 weeks later. The entire town came. Even Constance Harwell was there, sitting alone in the back pew dressed in black. She watched with sad eyes as Clara walked down the aisle in a simple white dress Nettie had sewn from old curtain fabric. She had wild flowers in her hair. Samuel waited at the altar, looking at her like she was a miracle made real. "You are beautiful," he whispered as she joined him. "You clean up pretty nice yourself." The preacher cleared his throat, and they began. They said their vows, simple and honest words, promises to love and honor each other through whatever life threw at them. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her like she was the only person in the world, and the church filled with cheers. "You look overwhelmed," a voice said. Clara turned from the town square celebration to see Deputy Hollister. "I am," she admitted. He shifted his feet. "I wanted to apologize for not stopping Harwell sooner. You let Samuel out of that cell. You saved my life. I should have done it before then." Clara nodded. "Yes, you should have. But you did it when it counted, and that is what matters. You are more forgiving than I deserve." "Maybe," she said with a small smile. "But I am tired of being angry. Besides, I have better things to focus on." She looked across the square where Samuel was talking with some other ranchers. He must have felt her looking, because he turned and smiled right at her. Her husband. The words still felt new. "He is a good man," Hollister said. "The best. You are good for him. He has been more alive since you came here." Clara remembered finding him in that field, half dead with fever. She had saved a stranger, not knowing that in doing so she was also saving herself. "We are good for each other," she said quietly. The celebration carried on long into the night. Folks celebrated hard that night, a real barn burner of a party. When the last fiddle tune faded, Samuel and Clara walked back to the ranch, his hand holding hers. The new house stood quiet under the stars, solid and real. It felt like home. "You tired, darlin'?" Samuel asked on the porch steps. Clara gave a little laugh. "I am too tired to even think about it." "Fair enough," he chuckled. Inside, Scout the dog was already snoozing by the hearth. Later, tucked in bed, she curled up against his chest. "Samuel, do you reckon Margaret would have liked me?" He was quiet for a long spell. "I think she would have loved you," he said finally. "You're both stubborn as a mule." "Well, I hear that runs in the family," she whispered. A comfortable silence settled over them. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "For what?" "For not giving up. On this place. On us." He kissed the top of her head. "I should be thanking you for pulling me out of that field when any other soul would have just walked on by." "I couldn't," she answered simply. "Why not?" Clara thought for a moment, back to that day she found him, a broken man in the tall grass. "You needed help," she said, "and deep down I figured if I could save you, maybe I could save a piece of myself too." His arm tightened around her. "Did it work?" A long pause hung in the dark. "Yeah," she breathed. "I reckon it did." The next morning, Clara slipped out of bed before the sun. On the porch, she watched the sky turn from purple to gold. She held her mama's old handkerchief, tracing the little flowers sewn on the corner with her thumb. "I did it, Mama," she whispered to the breeze. "I finally found where I belong." The screen door creaked open. "Morning," Samuel said, sitting down beside her. "You all right?" "More than all right." He took her hand, and they sat there together, watching the sun spill over their land. She thought about all the years she'd spent running from a past that wasn't her fault. She thought about the home she lost, the good name they stole from her. Then she looked at Samuel, at the home they'd built from ashes, at the peace she never dreamed she'd find. It wasn't perfect, she knew that. Life ain't ever perfect. There would be hard days, sure as rain. But for the very first time, Clara believed she could do more than just survive. She could actually live. "What's on your mind?" Samuel asked. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Second chances," she said. "Just how grateful I am for mine." He turned and kissed her, soft and slow. "Me too, darling. Me too." The sun was higher now, painting gold across their garden and the house they built with their own two hands. For 32 years, Clara Mallister believed happiness was for other folks. She figured she was too broken to ever be loved right. She was wrong. Sometimes, when you least expect it, life gives you a reason to be brave. And if you're lucky enough to take that chance, you find everything you never knew you were looking for. Clara found Samuel. She found a home, and in the quiet Texas sunrise, she finally found herself. The woman who stopped to save a stranger ended up saving herself. And the man who thought he'd lost everything discovered that a second chance at love was the only thing that ever really mattered at all.